So as we begin talking about the appendicular skeleton, so that's the place that has appendages that hook into the axial skeleton, we talk about two girdles. We talk about the pectoral girdle, which is your shoulder, or your pelvic girdle, which are your hips. So we'll begin talking about your pectoral girdle with your shoulders, and we talk about two main bones, your clavicle, this S-shaped bone, and your scapula, which is this sort of triangular shaped bone, all right? Together, they're going to be very important for actually attaching your entire arm to your trunk. So let's start by looking over here at the attached skeleton. You can see this whole joint here, the shoulder joint. We'll talk about what that's called later on when we get to the joint chapter. But you can see the collarbone, which we call the clavicle, and the shoulder blade, this whole bone right here, which is called the scapula. And then this right here is the humerus, the arm, okay? And they're going to all articulate at this joint. When we talk about the clavicle, we talk about two important features, and that's the acromial end and the sternal end. So the sternal end articulates or touches with the sternum. Pretty simple, right? And the acromial end articulates or connects with the acromion of the scapula. So acromial end, sternal end. But how do you tell which end is which when you just have the bone loose? Okay, so let's go back over here to the bench top. We see the bone. And we basically look at the different angles. Okay, so this is sort of an S-shaped bone. The end that has a much steeper angle, right here, this archway is much closer together, much steeper, more closer to a point. That's the acromial end. And actually the bone itself is going to be a little bit flatter here. Okay, somebody's actually drawn on this with a highlighter. But you can see here, this end is the acromial end. And then the much wider angle goes in towards the sternal angle. Okay, and you can see it's also much thicker. This is more flat. This is much pointier and thicker. Acromial, sternal end. Okay, and then when we talk about the scapula, the shoulder blade, we're going to talk about several specific features as well as each of the sides, which we call borders, the points, which we call angles, and the flat surfaces, which we call fossa. So first, some of the features. First, we have the acromion. So the acromion is this really flattened looking feature, all right, that articulates with the spine. So this would be looking at from the back. So this would be, let's actually look here on this model, okay, of the whole skull, the skeleton put together. So this is the posterior surface, okay. We have this special feature called the spine where it sticks out, it articulates and doesn't articulate, excuse me, it points straight out towards the posterior direction. Okay, it's going to come to a flat surface, which we call the acromion. Okay, and that explains why this is called the acromial end of the clavicle, because this is the acromion. Then if we keep moving around the shoulder, we have a flattened surface called the glenoid cavity. We'll look at it over on the other bone in a second. The glenoid cavity is where the humerus locks in, so it's a kind of an indention right below the acromion. And then we have this other projection that we call the coracoid process, which sticks out to help form that joint. So the acromion, the glenoid cavity, and the coracoid process. And then back here, the acromion connects down into becoming the spine. So let's look at that here again on this scapula. Okay, so this is actually the other shoulder blade. So this is the flat surface on this side. On the anterior side, the flat surface side that's closer to the chest, we have that coracoid process. We have the glenoid cavity right here. Okay, that's where the humerus would fit into that socket. And then the acromion is going to articulate with the collarbone right here, as well as with the humerus on this lower side. And this flattened section, this acromion is going to connect into what we call the spine. All right. Next, we can talk about the different angles or points. Okay. So if we think about, we're always going to describe the glenoid cavity right here where the acromion and coracoid process are as being the most lateral. So this is the outside where the arm hangs down. Okay. This is basically looking from an anterior view. So this is the person's right scapula. And we can talk about the two angles. So the glenoid cavity is always going to be one of these angles. It's been rounded off. The other two angles or points of the triangle will be called the superior angle and the inferior angle. So this is going to point up. This is going to point down. Superior, inferior angles. And then next we call the different sides of the triangle, here, here, and here, borders. Okay, so we think about directionally, this is going to be the lateral border. Excuse me, this is going to be the medial border. Okay, this is closest to the inside. This is going to be the lateral border. Because remember, the arm is going to be sitting right here, so it's more lateral. And then this is going to be the superior border. Okay, because it's the most superior. Superior angle, inferior angle, superior border, lateral border, and medial border. Well, then next we have the names for the three flat surfaces. We call those foci, or fossa singular. So first, we can basically think about one of them being on one side, the anterior side of the bone. The other two are going to be on the posterior side. And the question is, are they above or below the spinous process, the spine? Okay, so if it's above the spine, we call that the supraspinous fossa. So this flat surface is superior, supraspinous fossa. And then down here, this would be the infraspinous fossa. So it's below or inferior, infraspinous fossa. And then the other surface, where we started out here on the anterior side, closest to the chest, we have the subscapular fossa. So subscapular fossa, infraspinous fossa, supraspinous fossa. And it's all about where the spine is.